Welcome, today's story is full of drama. Like and subscribe to stay updated. Let's get started.
I first noticed Emily Dawson on the first day of my junior year. Quietly, I found myself watching her whenever the opportunity arose. I never mentioned anything to anyone, but I guess some of my classmates picked up on my interest. Before Halloween, Emily confronted me directly about it. "You've been staring at me since school started." "Why?" Caught off guard, I stammered that I thought she was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. "Well, stop it." "I don't like it," she shot back. But stopping wasn't that easy. She was only a few inches shorter than me, had a confident presence, and striking green eyes that stood out against her auburn hair. After that conversation, though, I made an effort to be more discreet. We shared one class and had another where our classrooms were right next to each other, so running into her was inevitable. Eventually, when I glanced her way, I noticed she'd often be looking to see if I was watching. Even in class, where she sat in front of me, she turned around from time to time. One day in the hallway, she confronted me again. "You might as well ask me out. This little game is getting silly." It might have felt silly to her, but not to me. Still, I finally worked up the courage to invite her out for a soda at Tony's Diner, a classic soda fountain styled like the ones from the 40s and 50s, though they were pretty outdated by then. That first conversation revealed more about me than it did about her. I told her I was an orphan living with my great-aunt since my parents had died in an accident. I loved my aunt, but the age gap made it hard to connect deeply, and she was becoming forgetful. I helped around the house with chores in exchange for her care. At school, I kept up an A- average. Emily struggled to maintain B-, mostly because she was popular and didn't focus much on studying. She was athletic, playing soccer and basketball, while I had a part-time job after school that kept me from joining any extracurriculars. I hated when work clashed with her games. I wanted to be there to watch. I had my own circle of friends, and one of the closest was Rachel Monroe. We grew up on the same street and started kindergarten together, sharing classes all through grade school. High school drifted us apart a little, but we always found time to catch up. Rachel faced some judgment in school for her choices, but it never affected our friendship. We were close, but it was purely platonic, and that never changed. When I started developing feelings for Emily, jealousy crept in. Other guys noticed her beauty too, and she treated us all pretty equally. But after a while, I realized something. She would date someone else, and then it would be my turn again. I found comfort knowing I was getting as many chances with her as anyone else. Eventually, the jealousy faded because I knew she kept coming back to me. By senior year, it was clear I had her heart. As far as I knew, we were both inexperienced when it came to relationships, and I wasn't in a rush to change that. But on the night of senior prom, everything shifted. We snuck back to the house where I lived with my aunt, and by morning we both felt like different people. Changed in that she was wearing the tiny engagement ring that I could afford, and we were man and woman instead of boy and girl. Emily went to work at Benny's sub shop, and I went into a local factory as an inventory clerk in the stockroom. The sub shop was owned by a bachelor who intended to stay that way. Benny wasn't too bad-looking for a man of 36. Plus, he was genial and outgoing with the women who worked for him preparing food. My job didn't sound like much, and it certainly didn't pay too well at the entry level. However, I had the promise that if I did well in this position, I would have old Mr. Dobson's job as senior stock manager. Mr. Dobson would be retiring in 18 months. Some of it was pretty complicated, and a person had to pay particular attention to detail. There were a million things to learn. Just to name one item, we used gold leaf in some of the factory's applications, and this had to be dispensed with great care because of its cost. There were also strict levels of inventory to control. I think I was one of the more dedicated employees, or tried to be. Work picked up soon after I was hired, and the factory powers that be put on another shift. They gave me the stockroom to manage from 4 p.m. until midnight. I took it when I found it paid a 12% premium. Emily was working 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. There was a second shift at the sub shop, and the hours were 4 p.m. until 10 p.m. I could understand her loneliness in the evening, and when she came home one day saying she was taking the evening shift as well, we both thought this was a smart move. For weeks later, we were married, and as her boss had a small bungalow to rent, that is where we made our home. Emily had an aunt from Maine who attended, and we each had a couple of friends who came to City Hall to watch the ceremony. We were both almost 20 and on our way to a happy life together. The rent on the house wasn't beyond our means, and we had enough money to acquire some of life's luxuries. First came a vehicle. I thought a Toyota Corolla would suit us fine, but Emily held out for a Chevrolet Camaro. The payments were $90 a month more than we had budgeted. Emily said she would work overtime when asked to make up for it, and sometimes I took her into work for the noon crowd. We ultimately wanted to own our own home, and we were able to start a savings account for that purpose. We were in great shape when Emily said she was moving from food preparation to cashier, and there was a salary increase to go with that move as well. My raises came along as promised, and we were doing great. We had a car, we had started a fund to save for a home, and all of our bills were being paid on time. We had never talked about having children, and as we were still in our early 20s, there would be plenty of time to decide. Emily was very careful about her birth control program, and sex continued to get better as we became more experienced. Emily was always the one to suggest trying something new that she had heard about at work. I was reaping the benefits, so I welcomed them all. I felt I had life right by the balls. If I wanted something, I would squeeze life a little harder, and I would have everything. It had worked so far, hadn't it? I mentioned we had one car. I used it to travel to my work, which was located on the outskirts of Riverside. I would drop Emily off on the way. She rode home with her boss after the sub shop closed for the evening. I trusted Benny because he was 36 and so much older than we were. The transportation, the job hours, and the pay we were receiving were a perfect setup all the way around for the good life. I was 2 months away from Mr. Dobson's retirement and looking forward to a major increase in my salary. Then, a transformer blew that delivered electricity to the factory. Everything was down except for the battery-operated security lights. I hung around until just before Emily would be going home, intending to pick her up and maybe we would go for a beer together at some bar. I had to park down the street from the sub shop. I was walking toward the building when I saw Emily and Benny pause on the way out of the shop and kiss. They reached his car and were in it maybe 4 or 5 minutes before he started it. I could see their heads, and they hadn't kissed again, but they were awfully close. Was he fingering her? It certainly looked as if he was. I made my way back to where I was parked and, at a distance, followed them home. Emily got out and waited as Benny came around the car. They went into the house together. When she was unlocking the door, I could see his hand caressing her ass. The hall light came on, and I could see the silhouette of them kissing. No lights showed for a few minutes until the dim bedroom light came on. 50 minutes later, the bathroom light came on. 20 minutes after that, Benny came out after kissing Emily again in the hallway. He was still combing his wet hair as he got into his car and drove away. My normal time to arrive home was 12:35 a.m. I went into the house right on time. Emily had my supper laid out on the table and we sat down to eat. It was food from the sub shop. I always had a choice of a meatball grinder or cold cuts. There was usually a salad, and coffee was being poured as I came in. Most always, dessert was a pint of dulce and Duke's ice cream, which we split. Tonight, I passed on the grinder and ate what I could of the salad. The ice cream didn't sit well either. Emily was so concerned. Lucky for you, this is my shower night, so you don't have to make love to me. It struck me then that the nights Emily had taken her shower before I got home, I didn't get any loving. If we took the shower together, I always got some loving. I tried to remember how often this happened. There were 2 or 3 nights a week that she was showered before I arrived. I was restless that evening and went to bed before our usual time after the late-night shows. The next day, I dropped Emily off at her usual time. I made a phone call to work saying I was sick. I made a phone call to Rachel, the girl I had gone to school with. I explained the situation and said I would pay whatever it took for her to do what I proposed. It was to cost me a nice dinner out, and the rest would be free. Can't beat that. We had drifted apart after Emily and I became a couple, but we still were the best of friends. I picked Rachel up at 6 p.m., and we had a nice dinner at the best restaurant in town. Derek, this is going to destroy your wife, you know? Do you honestly want to do that to her? I've thought about it all day. I want her to know a little of the pain I feel. I'm leaving her tonight. I've taken the money from all of our accounts, but I'm leaving her the car. She has Benny, so she won't be destitute. He owns the house we are living in. I'm getting out. I'm more concerned about you. This is going to blacken your name terribly. You will have a reputation that you will never recover from. Doesn't matter. I am what I am. My reputation went down the tubes in high school. You knew who to call when you needed something like this. Didn't you? I'll admit I am using you. You don't have to go through with it. No, I will do it. At least I have had a date with a nice guy that I care about for once. You have always been a nice guy, and that is why I'm here. I have never married, and I don't ever expect to. I get a lot of sex, and sometimes I enjoy it. Just once, I would like to have someone say, "Rachel, I love you." But I don't ever expect to hear someone say it and mean it. Christ, Rachel, don't give up hope. I've just had my life shredded to bits, but I hope to be happy again someday. The scene was set when Emily was to arrive home. The only glitch was if Benny came into the house as he did the night before. If my theory was correct, I couldn't ever remember Emily taking a shower before I got home 2 nights in a row. Rachel and I took our shower at 8:30 p.m. Yes, we took it together. This was the first time I had ever seen or been with anyone other than Emily in my whole life. Would I act like a teenager? Rachel was unconcerned about me seeing her and laughed when she saw I was aroused. Derek, I have known you all of my life. Relax and pretend this is something we do every day. It is easy for me, but I can see it is hard for you. We heard Benny's car stop out front, and a few minutes later, drive off. The front door opened, and we heard Emily pause. The door of the bedroom was partially open so she could see the light was on. As she stepped into the living room, "Derek, is that you in bed? Did you get sick?" "No, dear, I'm not sick. Come in. We have company." Emily came to the door and pushed it fully open. Rachel and I were lying there close together in a way that left little to the imagination. I had one arm resting under her neck and over her shoulder, while Rachel held onto my other hand. Emily was speechless at first, but that didn't last long. She started shouting angrily. I snapped, "Quiet." Emily paused just long enough to hear Rachel calmly say, "Derek thought one wasn't enough, so he wanted to see how 2 would work. Want to join us?" Emily burst into tears and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I turned to Rachel with a grin. "I think we've got about 15 minutes before she either comes up with an excuse or loses it completely." Rachel smirked. "Derek, you really are something else. I'd love to have a chance like this again." I chuckled. "It's rare. I said it before, Derek. You are a wonderful person. Hurry. 15 minutes might not be time enough." It was. Rachel brought me to a climax way too soon for me to savor her at all. Maybe someday. While Rachel was taking her second shower of the evening, I went out to face my wife. Emily made no excuses, and nothing was said about Benny. There was that look that said she was guilty, and attack was the only alternative. "Derek, I want you out of the house in an hour. Just pack your things." "How could you do this to me? We have been together for 4 years. I thought you loved me, and then you bring trash like Rachel into our home and have sex with her right in front of me and in our marriage bed? Get the hell out. I don't think I will ever speak to you again." "Okay. That's just about what I figured you would say. I'm leaving you the Camaro. I have taken all of the money we have saved. That makes us just about even. I'm sure Benny will give you a raise when he finds out he won't have to share you with your husband." I picked up my suitcases that I had packed earlier and set them in the alcove behind the front door. I went out and put them in Rachel's car, which was parked on the street 1 space down from our driveway. I came back and waited for Rachel to come out of the bedroom where she was getting dressed. Emily wanted to say something. I didn't know what. Maybe an excuse for her adultery. Maybe she wanted to retract her request that I leave. I didn't ask. Rachel finally came out. She had taken time to freshen her makeup and had evidently used Emily's shower cap, because her hair had been combed and was totally dry. She was as beautiful as Emily, just in a different way. Emily had one parting shot at her. "You're a whore, Rachel." Rachel had one too. "No, Emily, I'm a hooker. I'm honest about that. You, though, are a cheating wife, a wife to a man that I would give my right arm to have love me like he loved you. I'm really sorry for you. I hope we never meet again because I can't stand the sight of you. Come, Derek. I think we are finished here." We drove away from my former home. "Where to, Derek?" "The bus station, I guess. My aunt is in a nursing home, and the state is caring for her. She has an administrator for what estate she has. I'll just buy me a ticket to who knows where. I'll find out if I like it where it takes me, and if I don't, I'll buy another ticket to somewhere else." "You mean you have no plans?" "I haven't had time to make any. Any suggestions?" "No, not off the top of my head. You shouldn't rush into anything, though. Why don't you stay with me tonight and make a plan? Tomorrow will be better after a night's sleep." I didn't leave town for a week. I was going to walk away from my job without informing them. I couldn't do that. for they had been very good to me. Mr. Dobson said wherever I landed and needed a recommendation, he would give me a good one. He said he was going to miss me very much. I suppose you were wondering if I was sleeping with Rachel. Yes, I was. But if you had asked if I was having sex with her, I would have to tell you no. Not yet, anyway. Rachel had a one-bedroom apartment, and she did not entertain her clients there. She would come in from a date and crawl into bed where I was sleeping, kiss me, and then let me sleep. Derek, this is the only way I can forget my lifestyle. I was making her breakfast in the morning, and then we would talk. The only taboo subject was Emily. It was 3 days after I was asked to leave Emily that I made a suggestion. Rachel, we get along great together. You have a reputation as a hooker here in the city. I certainly am leaving. Why don't we both leave? Leave together? I mean, we can be Rachel and Derek Lawson. You're married, Derek. I can't be Mrs. Lawson. I was thinking more of being sister and brother. That's too complicated. And it would mean you have a prostitute for a sister. Here maybe, but somewhere else you wouldn't have to be. I have a wife that could be classified as one. I paused. You know, if I thought she would change, I would take her back. You still love her, don't you? I have wondered how you feel about her after all of this, Derek. Do you think I could change my lifestyle living somewhere else? I do. Does sex mean that much to you? Could you go without it? I could if I could pay my bills. I'm on a savings program and didn't plan to do this very long, so I live as cheaply as I can. Do you want to try it, the brother and sister thing? I mean, we couldn't make love if we decided to go that route. We haven't decided that yet. Then we better make love before we decide, in case that is the decision we come up with. We spent the daylight hours and sometime after the sun went down making love. I said the words Rachel so wanted to hear. I truly believed I said them in such a way that she believed me. I think I was half in love with her myself at the moment. I certainly loved her more than I did my cheating wife. We lay cuddled together all night. It was 6 a.m. when we made the decision. Rachel said about getting her bills paid and the rest of her affairs in order. This took another day. I drove Rachel's car by my former home late Tuesday evening. Benny's car was parked on the street, and the one I left for Emily was in the driveway. I couldn't ascertain if he might be going home or staying. I would wait a little while and find out. I had in my hand a couple of things that Rachel used for protection when out on an uncertain date. The house was dark, and I waited in the shadows for over an hour. Finally, the hall light came on, and I could see Benny and Emily kissing. He came down the steps as Emily closed the door. Did I care if she saw me? Not really. I came up behind him with a small stun gun, which was just powerful enough to send him to the ground. He got a good dosage of pepper spray in the face and a couple of hearty kicks to the ribs. I just wanted him to feel a little pain. I was sure this would do it. This was so out of character for me that if anyone saw me getting away, they wouldn't connect me. 2 hours later, we had the car packed and loaded and drove west out of the city. We left Rachel's reputation and my cheating wife behind. Now we were just a brother and sister out looking for a new life. One we hoped would be better than what was behind us. The town marker said there were 11,250 inhabitants in the town. Big enough for some business, but with the small town feel to it. It would be mostly agriculturally connected, although we went by an industrial park on the outskirts. I pulled into Carlson's diner for lunch. When we got inside, we found it clean, and it had a menu posted. We had been on the road for 2 days. We could have made it this far in one, but had made a leisurely journey out of our traveling. We had slept one night in the same bed and one night in twins. A sister and a brother didn't or shouldn't, so we didn't. Hey, this was going to work. We ordered the special soup, a 7-ounce steak with fries, apple pie, and coffee. As we were there on the tail end of the lunch hour, we were soon the only customers. The lone waitress, Agnes, pulled a chair from a table and sat at the end of our booth. I see your car tags say you were from the state of New York. On vacation, are you? Nice for a man and wife to go on vacation this early in the summer. Nope, we aren't married. We could be brother and sister and looking to relocate. I might take a job if I could find a decent one. We'd have to find a place to live, though. That isn't too expensive. Well now, half the businesses in town are looking for help, but you probably will want to go into one of the new factories. They pay more. Christ, we can't even get anyone to wash dishes here in the diner. Too bad you two aren't husband and wife. This diner is up for sale. It would be a good business to own. It'll get better as soon as all of the factories start up. How much would it take to buy say, on a lease purchase agreement. You could do better than that. If you want an investor to go in with you, I'd put up half and you could sign for the remainder. I have a few pennies saved, and I have been waiting tables here for 7 years. Of course, you'd have to work about every day. If you have never run a diner before, I could train you. There is a 2-bedroom bungalow out back that could be fixed up to live in if you ain't too fussy. You sound desperate. I am. I love this place. I'd buy it all myself, but then, as I said, there is the problem of getting help, and I ain't much on managing. With 2 new young people that wouldn't mind working, this place could really hum along. It is a thought. We are going into town for the night. If you see us for breakfast, maybe you will have time to talk with us again. I'll make time. I still have dishes to do and better get busy. What did you say your names were? I smiled to myself. This woman was a master at getting information out of a person. We are Rachel Monroe and Derek Lawson. We found a small motel on the other side of town. There was only 1 room available, but it did have 2 single beds in it. When we signed in, the lady at the desk made note that Rachel signed her name as Miss and that we stated we were sister and brother. But we would be comfortable sharing a room. Close enough. Let her figure it out. We walked around the settled part of the town, and yes, just about all of the businesses had a sign in their window saying they were hiring. Just plain help wanted. We lay down on our respective beds in the afternoon and talked. What do you think? Is this the town we want to start a new life in? Looks promising. I don't mean to pry, but how much money do you have with you? I only have about $2,800. Some of that, I suppose, belongs to Emily, but she most likely got that much from Benny for spreading her legs. Rachel started laughing. I got my money from spreading my legs the same way. If we bought the diner, we could say this is the business that built it. That struck me as really funny, and it was infectious, keeping us in stitches for several minutes. Seriously, I have almost $118,000 put together. Probably isn't enough to buy the diner, but we will never know unless we ask. Let's go back and have dinner tonight and see what it is like with more customers in attendance. The diner was almost too busy. The owners were the ones that prepared the food. They were good at it without any lost motions. Many of the customers were well known, and their meals were started just as soon as they came through the door. Agnes had a young girl helping on the tables, and both were swamped. The customers all understood if their meals were delayed and never complained. There was a nice family atmosphere to the diner. As we were finishing up dessert, Rachel spoke. The place needs 1 more experienced waitress and more help in the kitchen. If the owners are doing the cooking for all 3 meals, they must be exhausted. You and I could work here, and there still wouldn't be enough help. Wouldn't it be fun if we knew all of the customers by their first names like Agnes does? I was getting more and more interested as Rachel talked. She was much more at ease with people than I was, men especially. I had worked in a stockroom with very little interaction with other people. I could learn to be friendly by watching the way Agnes treated the patrons. When Agnes came by with our check, I asked, "Customers are about all gone. How long before you clean up and get to go home?" "There are the pots and pans I have agreed to do. I get a little extra for doing those, just so they get done. An hour or more after that. That doesn't do it all either. I will have to come in early and do the prep work and setups that should be done tonight. I'm so tired I'm Google-eyed. Would you like help with the dishes tonight? We are kind of interested in what you were saying this afternoon. I'll show you what has to be done. There is a god up there, and he is smiling down on me as we speak. Wow! I haven't got up this early for years. The diner opens at 6:30, and the coffee has to be ready by the time the door opens. Not like going to work at 4 in the afternoon, that's for certain. I never got up before noon many days. Of course, I never went to bed many nights before 3 a.m. either. Are you sure you slept anyway? Bed was my workplace just as your stockroom was for you. Those days are behind us now, and I'm glad. Even though I have to get up this early. We parked behind the diner and went in the back door to the kitchen. We had become familiar with the interior last night while doing the pots and pans. This morning, the elderly owners, Bert and Betty Whitaker, were there already starting breakfast, and Agnes was in the dining room, making sure the sugar bowls were filled, etc. It seemed as if half the time Rachel and I were in the way. But Rachel was taking care of the dishes as they were used, and when the plates and silverware came out, she kept up with those. Myself, I tried to help with the cooking, but it was mostly having stuff at hand for Bert as the orders were prepared. I passed them through to Agnes, who grabbed them and carried them to the correct table. That was the start of the first day. A month later, Bert cornered us as we were tidying up after breakfast one morning. Rachel, Agnes, and I had handled the whole meal without a glitch. I had nosed around and found some part-time service help to hire. Sometimes the help was only signed up for one meal a day. I had contacted the Parent-Teachers Association, and the president had put me on to some women that could use a few extra dollars. When school began, I knew we would have people for this work and the few dollars it paid. Anyway, as I said, Lola and I were cornered. Will you two buy the diner from Betty and me? Agnes wants to buy half, but is concerned she can't operate it and take care of everything else that goes with running it. I can see where the three of you can do well better than the missus and I have. In fact, you have done things that I have never thought of. That night we ran out of rolls to set on the table. You substituted the little fake pizzas to keep the table occupied while they were waiting for their meal. That was a stroke of genius. Where did you get that idea? From my folks. They grew up poor. We always had a garden, and Mom always canned salsa to preserve the garden produce. Sometimes, when I was just a little hungry, I would spread a little salsa on a slice of toast, put a slice of American cheese on it, heat it up, and that was my snack. Takes about 5 minutes now that we have microwaves. The cost to buy everything for the item now amounts to about 40 cents. Well worth the cost to have a satisfied customer. You notice a customer usually orders a little extra off the menu, so that little item amounts to about the same as a single roll. So what kind of deal are we talking about here? The 1st of September, one waitress, one retired hooker, and one cheated-on husband owned a very busy diner together. Bert was 70 years old, and the diner had been his whole life. We didn't see Betty very often after we bought it, except when she occasionally came in for a meal. Bert, though, showed up almost every day to lend a hand. He wouldn't take any money for what he did, saying he wanted to keep his hand in. Eventually, when I asked about the building out back, he decided he would fix it up for Rachel and me to live in. All we had to do was buy the materials. It wasn't specified, but he said it went with the property. Rachel was quickly learning how to wait tables and enjoyed being out front with the customers. She made an excellent waitress, and when someone flirted with her, she gave back as good as she got. If they got too fresh, she threatened to call on her brother. Usually, it was all in fun, so problems never developed. I spent the first Thanksgiving away from Emily feeling really sad. She had always made so much of the holiday. I almost called her but figured Benny would probably answer the phone, and I would feel worse than ever. I was pretty blue, and it wouldn't leave me. Her 21st birthday was in 10 days. Derek, fly home to see her. You either have to forget her or divorce her. If you talk to her, you should be able to decide what to do. The diner will be okay without me for a few days. Go. I'm giving you 5 days. The Whitakers will come in to cover for you. I bought a plane ticket and was soon in the air. When I reached the airport, I rented a vehicle and drove the half hour to my hometown. The Camaro was in the driveway, and I could see lights on in the house. I walked up to the door. It was locked, but my key still worked, so I opened it and went into my former home. Emily was on the couch in the living room, eating a snack from the TV tray in front of her. She took her eyes off the TV screen and looked reluctantly toward me. This told me she was expecting someone else. Tears started pouring down her face, and she started sobbing. I wanted to go to her, but held back, waiting to see what she would say. Derek, I wondered if I would ever see you again. Did you come to gloat over your cheating wife? I don't know what you mean. Why would I gloat? Emily pushed the tray and table from her and stood up. Because I'm pregnant, that's why. She was beginning to show a pregnancy. It's Benny's baby, but he won't have anything to do with either me or the coming child. I've been such a fool, Derek. I want to say I'm so sorry for what I did to you. This made me angry. I suppose if Benny was still loving you and wanted the baby, you would feel you wouldn't have to tell me you were sorry. Am I right? Emily collapsed back onto the couch, crying even harder. I don't mean to cry. I'll stop if you just give me a minute. I went out to the kitchen and put the coffee on. The cupboards had some food in them, but were not as well stocked as when I lived here. Coffee was just about perked when the back door opened, and a woman stepped in. She was older than we were and very plain-looking. Who are you? I remembered her as being Emily's aunt from some town upstate. I couldn't remember her name, though. Emily's former husband. A look of recognition came over her. Emily spoke from behind me, zeroing in on the words former husband. Did you divorce me, Derek? No. Didn't you divorce me? That was the plan, wasn't it? I received a subdued no. The woman said, "Good. That solves all of Emily's problems. You two can get back together and go on with your lives." Emily stared into my face. What she read there told her it isn't going to happen. Emily shook her head. "Aunt Margaret, I can't ask him to take me back after the way I treated him." Aunt Margaret sighed but didn't say anything. I got down some cups and poured the coffee. Soon the questions started. "Derek, were you the one who beat up Benny? When?" "A day or so after you and Rachel were here. I thought it must be you." "It wasn't." "How come you got pregnant?" Emily looked down, her face red. "Derek, I was so pissed at you and Rachel that I thought I would show you. I was going to get knocked up and say the baby was yours. It didn't work because it took too many weeks before that happened. Even Benny couldn't deny that it belonged to him. I made him pay for it, though." "What about Rachel? Did you ever see her again after that night?" "I'm living with her. We are in business together." I suddenly remembered what Rachel had said about how the business was financed. The business that built it. I tried to contain my smile but couldn't. Emily thought I was having pleasant thoughts about the woman who she had to believe was a hooker. "Oh, Derek, does that mean you were her pimp?" "No. And for your information, she hasn't had a client since that night, and I don't have sex with her. We are part owners of a diner and live in the same house." Emily looked at me, confused. "So how do you stand with Benny? Does he still come around?" "God, no. When he found out I was pregnant, he fired me. I had saved a little money after you took all I had, and I hired a lawyer to file harassment charges against him. So, rather than go to court and risk losing his sub shop, he is paying what I asked for. I get a monthly income, and when the baby comes, he is going to pay all of the bills and maintenance until the baby is 18. Benny has to keep a paid-up life insurance policy to cover me and the baby in case anything happens to him." "What happens to the baby if something happens to you?" Emily hesitated. "It goes to the person the court designates as caregiver. What Benny pays goes with the child, except if he is the caregiver. Then the administrator is to fight against him having the baby. I have named the person that I would want as my first choice, and my lawyer says the court would follow my wishes." Emily was quietly thinking over what we both had learned. "I know you are living with Rachel, and you say you aren't sleeping with her. I don't believe you. Believe what you want. You drove me to her. It was our decision not to continue having sex. You want to know why? And it has nothing to do with you. She is waiting for someone to come along and tell her he loves her. I used her to get back at you without thinking of her feelings. And there is no getting over that. But we are still the best of friends. And I respect her. And I do love her. Just not in that way." I had ignored Aunt Margaret, but now I said, "Aunt Margaret, it was nice to meet you again. I should be getting along. Take care of Emily, will you?" Emily looked at me, her eyes full of sadness. "Derek, I don't know what to say to you about the baby. I guess I just wish things had worked out in our marriage, where it was us who were having a baby." Tears came to Emily's eyes, and she went into the living room. Aunt Margaret put on her coat and walked out with me. It was cold, and as I unlocked the car door, she slid into the passenger seat. "I want to have your address and phone number. I also want to know if you are going to divorce my niece." "Not at present. I don't have the money because everything is tied up in the diner. If she wants one, she will have to pay for it." It was a nasty remark when I said, "Maybe Benny will pay for it." I wrote down my address and phone number. "Stop it. Emily brought this on herself, but she is asking nothing from you. She is soon to be a single mother with no one except me to love her. She is paying an awful price for what she did, but she is making the best of a bad situation. Give her that at least. You just don't know how much she hurt me. Do you? For 4 years, I lived every moment for her." I had to stop a minute before I continued. "But that is behind us now." I reached over the front seat and grabbed a package from behind me. "Tomorrow is her birthday. I know how excited birthdays always made her. I had a friend buy this for me to gift to her. She'll suspect that it was my friend Rachel who bought it, but it wasn't. It was a woman named Agnes who doesn't even know I was married. I know the dress won't fit her right now, but it should someday. I had had enough. You better go in as it is cold out here. I think you still love Emily. This is all so terrible, Derek. If you want to contact me, remember my name is Burns, Sylvia Burns. I'm in the phone book here in town." I watched my wife's aunt walk to the door. Emily was holding it open for her and was waving goodbye to me as I pulled away. I drove back to the airport, sleeping on a bench until I could get on a flight back to Ohio. Business was good all winter long. New, repeat customers were naming our diner the place to eat. Our seatings for all 3 meals were nearly full to capacity. Agnes was the first to mention expansion. Rachel and I discussed it, but we knew it would mean a heavier debt load. Then, suddenly, a factory went into production, and we were asked to cater their lunches. The bank that held our note was more than willing to lend money for the expansion at the diner. Money for equipment to set up in the factory was available as well. Getting experienced help was the biggest problem, and we were having to advertise out of the area. Often, we went through 3 applicants before we were satisfied with a cook who could prepare our menu to our satisfaction. The lunch program at the factory was handled by 1 full-time person and 1 part-time worker at serving time. The meals were all cooked and prepared in the diner and transported to the site. I turned 21 in January and discovered I had found my life's work in managing the diner. Finally, we were able to hire enough help so that Rachel and Agnes had to wait on only 2 of the 3 meals each day. They alternated each week, doing breakfast and lunch one week, and lunch and dinner the next. Lunchtime was the busiest, so both women were there for that meal. I came back from transporting the hot containers of food and trays of sandwiches to the factory on April 19th. Agnes met me at the door as I came into the kitchen. Derek, some woman named Margaret Burns, called. She said your wife gave birth to a boy this morning about 6 a.m. She has named him Derek Roger Lawson Jr. That's nice. I pushed by her and came into the kitchen. Somehow, this wasn't a surprise. I knew the baby was coming, of course. And knowing Emily, the name wasn't that much of a surprise either. I would have to think about this before I decided if what Emily had done bothered me all that much. Agnes stood there watching me as I ignored her and went about my duties in the kitchen. I didn't know you were married. Congratulations, you must be very happy. She was fishing for information. I gave her some. I'm married. The baby isn't mine. We are estranged because he is someone else's. What she named the baby was her choice, and I wasn't involved at all. We will not be having a conversation again about my life before I arrived here. Is that understood? Agnes nodded her head. I did see Agnes and Rachel with their heads together off and on throughout the rest of the day. Rachel tackled me about the information I had given Agnes. We had the evening meal to serve together, and Agnes wasn't present. I pretty much shut Rachel down the same as I did Agnes. I just didn't want to discuss it with anyone. June 10th, I received a letter from Aunt Margaret, addressed to me here at the diner. Agnes, as luck would have it, was the one that happened to sort the mail that day. The letter just had a note and a snapshot in it. Derek, Emily isn't aware that I am sending you this note and the picture of her holding your namesake. She is wearing the dress you handed me when you were here last. Motherhood becomes her, and Emily is fast returning to the woman she was when you and she were happy together. She never mentions you, but I know you are in her thoughts. It is the loving way she talks to Junior. Most of the time I never know who she is talking to, you or the baby. I know I am meddling and shouldn't be writing, but I feel so sad that Derek Jr. doesn't have the love of a father. Love, Aunt Margaret. I was angry at first, but then I remembered that this was Emily's only relative. That made me think of my own aunt. I had really neglected her. I would visit her soon, sometime this summer for sure. Women do meddle. Rachel was a woman. I understand you received a letter from home today. Yes. A note from Emily's aunt. Well, what did it say? Come on, Derek, share with me. We left town together, and in a way I'm involved, especially if there are any changes coming up. No changes that I know of. The note just said that Emily was reasonably happy because she now has a baby to love. I had Agnes buy a dress last December for Emily's birthday, although she didn't know it was for my wife. I left it there, even after I found out Emily was pregnant and the dress wouldn't fit. Aunt Margaret sent a picture of Emily in the dress holding the baby. Show it to me. I will if you don't make any comments about what I should or shouldn't do. Promise that, and you can see the note and the picture. Promise. She did keep her promise. Tears were in Rachel's eyes as she stared at the image. All she said was, "He is so beautiful, Derek. I want a baby just like him." She came into my arms and kissed me. There was hunger and some passion in the kiss. Wouldn't you know it? I looked up and Agnes stood behind us. What you just did is incest. That's no kiss a brother and sister should share. Are you too kinky or something? We turned and faced our partner. We looked at each other and then burst out laughing. Rachel was the one to explain our relationship. Rachel took a deep breath and faced Agnes with a smirk. Agnes, that wasn't incest. Derek and I are just friends. Not the brother and sister we have led you and others to believe. I saw Agnes' eyebrows rise, but she said nothing, waiting for Rachel to explain further. Rachel continued. We go back as far as first grade in school. We grew up in houses only 2 doors apart. We were friends all through the years until Derek first became attracted to Emily, the girl he later married. By the time he met her, I discovered what I had between my legs was something that other boys would give anything to see or feel, so I gave it to everyone, except Derek. After we graduated, I started getting paid for what I was giving away for free. I was making good money at it too. You know how much I came here with? I made that on my back with my legs wide and in the air. Derek and Emily were married, and I hung out my shingle as a hooker. A couple of years later, and just before we arrived here, Derek discovered Emily was cheating. He was badly hurt and did the meanest thing he could think of to his wife. He hired a hooker and did her right in the marriage bed, just as his wife was coming home from work, just so she would see him. That was as far ahead as he had planned. She was humiliated just the same as he was. Emily was aware that Derek and I had been close friends for years. She also knew what my reputation was and what business I was in. Insulted and probably believing we had been carrying on for years, she kicked him out, never wanting to see him again. Derek left and stayed with me for about 5 days before we left town. During that time, we had 1 session of 10-hour, non-stop sex. When the marathon was over, we decided we would go somewhere, find jobs, and treat each other as if we were brother and sister. We would leave my reputation and his cheating wife behind and start a new life. That's how and why we came here. Derek and I have lived in the same room many times, and now we live in the same home together. Not once have we had sex since that time a year ago. Actually, we haven't had any with anyone else either. So, the kiss you observed was more than what would happen between a brother and sister. More than should happen between good friends as well. I was carried away with wanting something when I saw the picture of his wife and her baby. Derek is a good man and always will be, so it isn't going to happen with me. I stood silently, letting Rachel explain everything. She had been completely honest about what had happened. Now it was my turn to say something. I turned to Agnes and said, "Don't you ever disrespect Rachel. She is a wonderful woman, no matter what she says or what she was. Laugh if you want, but I have always respected her. I wish she could say the same for me." Rachel looked at me surprised. "What do you mean?" I sighed and said, "I'll answer that. Derek thinks he traded on our friendship by hiring me to get back at his wife. I give it no thought, but he has always felt guilty about asking it of me." Agnes nodded. Then, she asked, "Derek, may I see a picture of your wife? I can't visualize her at all." I handed Agnes the picture. She studied it for a long moment before saying, "I recognize the dress. I wondered who you planned to give it to. Your wife is so beautiful, and the baby is adorable. You have to bring your wife back into your life if there is any chance at all." I looked at Rachel. She had promised not to tell me what to do. Now I was making Agnes the same promise. You tell her what I made you promise. The same applies to her. I'm leaving. I was almost out the door when I thought about the picture and the note. Going back, I took it out of Agnes' hand. That night I didn't sleep much. I was up twice to look at the picture. First, of course, I studied my wife's image. My thoughts ran from anger to sadness, and finally to love. Love. But if only the kid wasn't there. I could see love shining in her eyes for the baby she was holding. I could remember when, at one time, that love shining in her eyes was for me. I was back to being sad again. Could I ever have that much love for 2 people at the same time? It didn't seem possible. Especially with all that happened between the 2 of us. Was it possible? Given what had transpired, I would have to show that amount of love for Emily, then double it and then transfer half to the baby she was holding. I studied his image. He was a baby, for God's sake. He had a mother, and that was about all he had going for him. What would he have if I was father to him? Would he grow up to have my values? Would he follow in my footsteps? Could I give him a better life than I had? So many questions, and so much turmoil in my mind. I suppose even if a man and a woman had a child together, could they be sure their kid would turn out to be one they were proud of? I did sleep for a bit. Then I woke with the question in my mind about Emily. Could I trust her to be faithful to me as she vowed to do when we were first married? Her track record wasn't good at all. Before going to sleep the second time, I looked at the image again. I no more than glanced at Emily's image. I centered on the baby. Derek Roger Lawson Jr. Not bad at all. had a nice sound to it. Agnes had the morning shift. She was almost as haggard as I was. I wasn't needed in the kitchen now, and I often did my paperwork, ordering supplies and doing payrolls, while sitting in a corner booth. Whoever was waiting tables kept my coffee cup filled. We stopped serving breakfast at 10 a.m. Shortly thereafter, Agnes came over to my booth. "Derek, I need to talk to you. I want to tell you the story of my life." I looked at her, surprised. "I suspect this has something to do with my wife." "It has nothing to do with you and your wife. I just want to talk, that's all." "How long is it going to take?" "Couple of hours. After lunch would be the best time." "That's because I may get emotional." I leaned back in my seat, thinking, is this something I need to know? We have been in business together now for a year. Why now? "I just want to get some things off my chest." Agnes looked upset and nervous. I could plainly see that. "This afternoon at 3. Would you like to do this somewhere besides here?" She nodded and walked away, leaving me to think that I needed a place more private. I knew Rachel would be in the house, and Agnes had indicated she didn't want to share whatever she was going to say with anyone but me. It had to be at her own apartment. I was out in the kitchen on the dot of 3. Agnes came through and went straight to my car. I slid in and said, "This has to be at your home." She nodded. "Okay." We arrived at her small apartment and went inside. I had never been invited to her home before, and we had never socialized at all. It was sparsely furnished but of good quality. She led me through a mini kitchen which had a small table and one chair. The living room held a TV, an older 19-inch model, and I saw no evidence of a VCR or DVD player. There was a nice radio, though, sitting on the sideboard. She saw me looking around. I'm not into much TV. I hate sitcoms and prefer to listen to the radio. There are a couple of country stations that I have on when I'm home. They play the older cheating songs that I'm addicted to. "Would you like something to drink?" "I don't have much on hand as I don't drink at all." "That's part of what I'm going to be telling you." I declined the alcohol. "I'll get coffee then." As she was making this, I glanced more closely around the room. There were several pictures of a 7-year-old girl on the mantel, the walls, and I could see one through the open door to her bedroom on the nightstand. She brought the coffee in and set it on the table in front of the couch. It was sweetened but without cream, just as she served it to me at the diner. There were a few butter crackers on a plate to go with it. I took a sip of coffee and looked at her expectantly. Agnes spoke. "Derek, you are 21 and have had to mature early. Life has tossed you a curve, but I think you are handling it pretty well. You seem to focus on one problem at a time. I never was able to do that." She looked directly at me. "Look closely at me and tell me what you see." I hesitated. "I guess I can do that, but I don't know why." She didn't say anything, just waited for me to answer. I studied her. "I see a plain but pleasant-faced woman, maybe 40 or so years old. You have a nice figure and you keep yourself well. You have many friends, from what I see of you at the diner. You are not afraid to give a little more of yourself if you can help someone. I know you are generous. First because you helped Rachel and me get started in the diner, and second because you knew it was time for the Whitakers to stop working so hard and retire. The only thing that puzzles me is that I have never known you to go out on a date." She nodded. "You did pretty well, Derek. Actually, that is me. But that is me now, not what I was years ago. That is what I am going to tell you about what I was years ago." She took a deep breath and continued. "I wasn't married as early as you were. I was 20. My childhood was a fairly happy one. My mother had me when she was almost at the end of her childbearing years. My father was older than Mom. They are both dead now. I started to go a little wild in my late teen years. Not bad, just some drinking and some sex. I wasn't as pretty as my peers, and I wanted the same attention that came to them. I met a man and fell madly in love with him. We married, and things were great for a few years." Agnes hesitated, looking at the pictures of the little girl. "I became pregnant shortly after we married and had the girl you see in the pictures around the room here. I suppose I paid too much attention to my baby and not enough to my husband. That happens to a lot of couples, and it never causes any problems, except when it does." Her voice became a little harder. "When Hannah, that's my baby, was 4 years old, Hank, my husband, sat me down and said he wanted to swap with another couple for sex. I sat up straighter. This crushed me, but to keep his love and my family intact, I agreed. Hank should have married someone prettier than I am, for he was handsome and just naturally attracted women. He is still handsome, for that matter." She let out a bitter laugh. "Anyway, we contented ourselves with this other couple for more than a year. Sex wasn't much different with the other man than with Hank, so it didn't bother me that much. I was thinking that Hank would get tired of swapping and we would be exclusive again. But I was wrong. She paused and looked at me. This other couple hooked up with a different couple and invited Hank and me to enlarge the group to include us. I objected and wouldn't go. This was getting too far from a loving family in my mind. Hank went out with them, and I found out later that this was a full-blown swinging organization. A pretty wild one with orgies and drugs, etc. I was very bitter and fought with Hank continually. Agnes' voice dropped as she said, "These were his words once. Try it just once. You'll love it. You like sex, and for once you can get all you want in just one evening." Agnes' face twisted in pain. Pissed off, I agreed to attend. Her next words were slow and deliberate. "Derek, do you know what a pig party is?" I shook my head. "Actually, you don't want to know. Anyway, I was the pig, and I was set up by my own husband." She took a sip of coffee, but her hands were shaking. I will say I was out of it from the drugs and alcohol they were feeding me. I did not know what or how bad I was until I saw some tapes that were passed around of me as the pig. Agnes' voice had gone flat. She was narrating it like it was someone else's life. 3 years. I was the star. She corrected herself. No, 2 years. I counted the year we just swapped with the one couple. It had to stop sometime, of course. She hesitated, took another sip of coffee, then continued. One night, Hank and I were headed to the party. When we got out front, he said he wasn't feeling well and was going home. He'd send the babysitter home and watch Hannah. I didn't want to go inside, but he urged me, telling me he heard that they had 2 new couples and a good supply of drugs. You see where I was by this time, Derek? I had the wrong priorities, mostly because I was addicted to something other than family. I sat motionless, waiting for her to continue. Agnes took a deep breath and continued. 3 hours later, the party was raided, and I was led off to jail. Hank wouldn't bail me out, saying he didn't want me around Hannah. I spent 2 months in a cell waiting for my trial to come up. I was stunned. The night I went into the party, there were 33 people there. When the raid took place, there were only 9 of us. It was always suspected that many of the partygoers had been tipped off beforehand. I was so far out of it anyway. I probably wouldn't have believed anyone, even if I was told. Agnes was quietly sobbing now. I didn't know if she was going to tell me the aftermath or not, but she did. Social services took Hannah. Hank was never charged. Hell, he escaped everything by saying he was home watching his daughter the nights I went out. The prosecution brought in the tape of me at the pig party, and as there were drugs found the night of the raid, I was sent to jail for 2 years and labeled an unfit mother. Hank ended up with sole custody of Hannah. He also has a restraining order against me. I am not able to go near or see Hannah until she is 18. Her words hit me like a brick. Hank got off free then. Agnes gave a bitter nod. Yes. Over the years, I have come to the conclusion that he was the one that tipped off the cops to the party. You see, he married one of the women that was a regular before the raid. Her husband and I both spent jail time. She was quite wealthy too, and she got everything. She even got Hannah to mother. Tears were flowing freely now. I got up and pulled Agnes into my arms, holding and hugging her. I waited until the tears slowed before asking, "How did you come to the Whitakers and working at the diner?" She sniffled and said, "I did about like you did when I got out of prison. I didn't have a home, a family, or any money. I was on probation and couldn't leave the state. Fortunately, I had a nice probation officer, and she gave me the Whitakers' name. They needed a waitress desperately. One Sunday afternoon, the probation officer brought me here to be interviewed. She really put herself out, because I lived 230 miles from here. That was 7 years ago. I sat in silence, absorbing everything she had told me. Then I finally asked, "Why are you telling me all of this?" Agnes looked at me, then sighed. "I made you a promise not to talk about you and your wife. Derek, I was about as screwed up as a woman can be. But I changed, and I have a feeling your wife has or can change. Please give her the chance. I don't want that little boy she is holding in the picture to end up like my Hannah has. Not the same, maybe, but the little boy needs a father. And you seem to be the best chance for him to have one." I was speechless. I wasn't angry at Agnes, but I didn't know what to say. "That means I will have to forgive my wife." Agnes nodded. "Will that be so hard?" I didn't answer. Instead, I asked a question. "Will you be seeing your daughter soon? The restraining order must be almost up." A smile broke over Agnes's face. The first one I had seen today. She is coming to see me next week. I hope. I told you how fortunate I was in having the probation officer. For the last 3 years, I have been corresponding with Hannah through her. Come see what she looks like now. Agnes led me into her bedroom and opened her nightstand drawer. There was the image of a beautiful young lady. It looked to be her graduation picture. Hannah knows all about me and what happened between my husband and me. My understanding is that Hannah barely tolerates her stepmother, hates the stepsisters, and is quite reserved around her father. They know she knows what they did to me, although they don't know how she found out. I studied the picture, then turned back to Agnes. Why have you told me about your life? She was quiet for a moment, then finally spoke. I don't know much about the situation between you and your wife, but I do know you should resolve it before the baby in the picture is hurt in any way. You and she may have a lot on your consciences, but don't let it carry over so he is hurt as well. I looked at Agnes. I should have been angry at her butting in on my affairs. She was watching me as well, for my reaction. I exhaled and said, I know you mean well, Agnes, but how can I resolve this when I don't know my own mind? More importantly, I don't know Emily's mind either. Her Aunt Margaret is the one that keeps notifying me of what is happening, but I have no idea whether Emily is aware that I know about the baby's birth. Agnes nodded. I could tell she wanted to say more, but she kept it to herself. We find out. I sat back and thought about it for a moment. Then I spoke. I guess. I should go see how my aunt is, the one who took care of me after my parents died. The next morning, I announced at the diner. I'm going back home to look in on my aunt. I might be away for 4 or 5 days. Rachel looked at me for a long moment. Then, she asked, have you made a decision about Emily and the baby? I shook my head. No, and I can't because I don't know how she feels. I don't want to start trying to resolve this without facing her directly. I need to be able to gauge her reactions if I say something. Rachel nodded. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I understand, but I wish you would remember one thing. This is your home now. You would give up an awful lot if you stayed with her in New York. Her voice was soft, and her hands were trembling slightly as she twisted a napkin between her fingers. It was only then that it hit me. Rachel was in love with me, more than the childhood companion I had always considered her to be. I hesitated. Then I said softly, I'll be back, Rachel. I couldn't say more. How could I? We had backed ourselves into a corner by arriving and letting others think we were brother and sister. I had a wife who had a child by another man, and I didn't know how I felt about it. I was sure that Agnes on my end and Aunt Margaret on Emily's end wanted me to take Emily back into my arms. They thought that was the manly thing to do and the best for the baby. Maybe it was. But I didn't know if I would be happy. I made sure my paperwork was caught up and got a round-trip ticket for New York. I arrived in town just before lunchtime. Again, I used my key to enter my former home. No one was there, but there was a stew bubbling in a crock pot. 15 minutes later, Emily and Junior came in. Hi, Derek. It's nice to see you. Lunch is about ready. You'll eat with me, won't you? Yes. Let me hold the baby while you get it ready. She handed me Junior, then hesitated. He needs his diaper changed. I nodded. Tell me how and I will attempt it. Emily looked at me with disbelief in her eyes. She shrugged and proceeded to show me what had to be done. When he was dry, I sat with him and watched my wife put the stew on the table. Where is your aunt? She is up north visiting friends for a few days. I'm glad she isn't here. We need to talk and she butts in. I know she means well, but it isn't always what I want. I nodded. I know what you mean. One of my partners is the same way. Rachel? No, Agnes, the one that selected the dress I gave you for your birthday. Emily smiled faintly. It is a beautiful dress. I love it. I couldn't believe you left it after finding out I was pregnant with Junior. I have had some pictures of me taken while I was wearing it. I nodded. I know. Aunt Margaret sent me one. She has your address. Emily blinked. I didn't know that. She has called and sends notes about you? How else would I have known that you named the baby after me? Does that bother you? I shrugged. The baby had to have a name, and I'm not ashamed of mine. So I'm okay with it. Emily filled the bowls with stew and sat down. She was decidedly nervous as she faced me from across the table. Junior was getting fussy. He needs to be fed. I stood. I'll go in the other room. Emily hesitated. No, I want you to watch. I'm still your husband and I have some rights. She hesitated, then shrugged. Okay, I guess. But I don't think it is right. I mean, under the circumstances. I didn't say anything. Emily's face was flushed at first, and then a look of contentment settled over her features as Junior hungrily went about getting his dinner. She glanced at me. I suppose that turns you on, me doing this in front of you? I shook my head. Not really. I was interested, that's all. I have never seen a baby nursing before. Emily fell silent. Finally, I spoke. I think it is time for us to decide where we are together in this marriage. First, I think you should tell me what you want. We both are 21. I'm not going to discuss how much you have hurt me. There is no point in that. You have arranged for Benny to pay for the baby's upkeep in a way that is still going to be between us and reminding me always that the baby isn't mine. I'm surprised you haven't asked for a divorce. I know if you don't have the money, Aunt Margaret would pay for it. She hasn't offered because she thinks the best for you and the baby is with me, right? Emily hesitated, then nodded slowly. Right. Then, she surprised me. Really, Derek? I haven't asked for a divorce because I'm afraid you would charge me with adultery. I don't want my baby to grow up having to deal with a mother marked with that label. I can make my way as a single mother. Believe it or not, there is a man that knows of my situation and still is interested in me. I'm interested in him as well. But I haven't encouraged him because I'm still married to you. I looked at her, considering her words. Do you have an attorney? She nodded. Yes, and he is a pretty sharp one too. It was he that got the deal with Benny to support me. He is a semi-retired judge with office hours in the morning. I thought for a moment. Would he come to the house this afternoon if you called him? I need to talk to someone, and I don't want our business to be public at all. Emily hesitated, then nodded. I'll call. She handed me Junior. Hold the baby and burp him. Just as soon as he does that, he'll go right to sleep. The meeting with the attorney lasted for almost 2 hours. I had planned to see my aunt in the nursing home today, but that would wait until tomorrow. It would be 2 more days before the papers the attorney was preparing would be ready for my signature. If all went well, my life was getting back on track again. It would take some time, but I expected that. I did not sleep with Emily, and we were not intimate. We talked all night until the baby's 2 a.m. feeding, and then I went to sleep in Aunt Margaret's bed. I learned all about my wife's descent into adultery, and this kept me from wanting to have sex with her. I had been so unaware of the deception at the time. I couldn't believe I had been that naive. While eating breakfast, Emily looked at me hesitantly. Derek, I want you to forgive me. I hesitated with the answer. I don't think I can. Not totally, anyway. You told me when I was here last time that you tried to get pregnant and say the baby was mine. I understand, because you were trying to get back at me for screwing Rachel in front of you. But that is way too much for me to forgive. Emily looked down, silent. But you seem to like Junior. I nodded. I do. The baby isn't really the issue here. It is your cheating, then me getting even, and then you making it worse by trying to stick me with someone else's baby. Tell me, were you thinking about a little one like Junior when you were screwing Benny, trying to get pregnant and blame it on me? Emily turned pale. She didn't answer for 2 minutes. Finally, she whispered, You were so right, Derek. I shouldn't have asked for forgiveness. But you have been so nice to me about everything. I sighed. I'm trying. But it is difficult. In the meantime, the getting evens have to stop somewhere. If we continue together, someday we would hurt each other again. If the attorney can get the court to go along with what he wants, we can be friends, but nothing more. Emily swallowed hard. I hope we can keep in touch. I would like to follow Junior as he grows up. After all, he has my name. I gave her a small smile. That's a promise. Just then, the front door opened, and Aunt Margaret came in. Emily was sitting across from me and had just opened her blouse to feed Junior. Margaret reached the wrong conclusion immediately. She thought that all was well between us and that we were living as husband and wife again. I stood and took her sweater as she removed it. Before I could hang it up, she came into my arms and hugged me tightly. I just knew if I sent you a picture of Emily in the dress that matched her eyes, you would hotfoot it here from Ohio. Or maybe it was your son. I gently pulled back. Sit down, Auntie. I arrived yesterday morning before lunch. I came to visit my aunt in the nursing home. We're not getting back together. In fact, we're working on getting our marriage annulled. I believe it's the best decision for both of us. Emily disrespected our marriage too much too often to think otherwise. Margaret looked back and forth between us. She finally asked, But what about him sitting there while you're feeding the baby? Emily shrugged. So what? He's seen me take care of the baby plenty of times before. I'm not ready to jump back into any kind of relationship. We're still technically married for a few more days, and maybe that makes things feel a little strange. But you have to remember, times are different now compared to when you were growing up. Margaret frowned. Where is he sleeping? Emily answered smoothly. He slept in your bed last night. Tonight he can sleep on the couch. Or you can sleep with me and he can have your bed again. I showed him how to change the baby, and someday when he has children of his own, he will know how. Margaret's lips pressed into a tight line. She looked at me. Not with you, I take it? I shook my head. No, not with her. I pushed back my chair. I'm going over to the nursing home. I'll be back and take you all to dinner. I'll tell you all about the diner that I'm part owner of this evening. I'm pretty proud of all my accomplishments in the last year. Emily had on the sky blue dress I had bought her. She was lovely. The car seat had a section that you could remove and carry the baby in. I carried it when we went into the restaurant. It was positioned next to Emily, and I sat across the table from the baby. I couldn't take my eyes off him. Emily and Aunt Margaret carried on a conversation as if I wasn't really included. I knew I wasn't being ignored, but I also wasn't that involved in their lives anymore. This could be me and my family sitting here, if I wanted it bad enough. But I had to forgive Emily. I had to accept that she had cheated on me. I had to forget about it. It was too much. I kept my attention on Junior for the rest of the meal. I called the diner when we returned from the restaurant. Agnes answered the phone. How are things going, Derek? Fine. I'm staying at my old home with Emily and the baby. Aunt Margaret is here as well. It's kind of crowded and I don't get much sleep. The baby is up about 2 every morning. I get up and help change him, Emily feeds him, and then we go back to bed. Agnes was curious. Are you two getting back together? Are you coming back here and bringing Emily with you? We have an attorney, and he is getting things straightened out for us. Do you guys miss me? I do. Lola hasn't said too much. She's kind of quiet. I hesitated. How soon before you are going to tell us what your plans are? Derek? We can't lose you. Lola isn't too thrilled if you bring your wife with you, but she would understand if you did. I'll tell her you called. Agnes' tone softened. Oh, my daughter will be here a week from Friday. I'm planning a big celebration. I wish you could be here. I smiled faintly. I'll try to make it. Say hi to everyone for me. I'll hang up now. Love you. Our attorney made us a court date on Monday before the family judge. He thought that the annulment would go through. The attorney had really worked on his presentation. There was no property to divide. The child was being supported very generously by the biological father. The wife also had some income so she could well take care of her child. And this was important. There was no animosity between the parties. There just was no love. And in the interest of all concerned, the marriage should be dissolved. Monday night, after the court had taken the annulment under advisement, I called Lola. It was late and she had been sleeping. Lola, I was seeking an annulment in court today. I don't know how the judge will rule, but the attorney thinks he will rule to dissolve. If he doesn't, I will have to divorce Emily the regular way. That takes 6 months, which is a long time to put one's life on hold. It's a path that keeps me from doing what I want to do. I just called to let you know where I'm at. Lola's voice was sleepy, but soft. Thank you for calling, Derek. Is the baby as cute as he is in the picture you showed me? I chuckled. More than that, even. I've even helped change him. God, a baby can make a nasty-smelling mess. Lola laughed lightly. How's Emily with all of this? She's good. Beautiful as ever, of course. She wants this to go forward as quickly as possible. And I'm staying here with her and her aunt. I kicked the aunt right out of her bed, and she has to sleep with Emily. The old lady is pretty disappointed we aren't staying together. She likes me. I like her too. Hell, I still like Emily. I have to say, I love the baby. Someday, I'm going to have a son to call my own. Lola's voice was quiet. I wish I was as certain about my future. I hesitated, then said softly, maybe we should sit down when I get home and see what we can do about your life. I want you to be happy. We have always been pretty honest with each other. I bet we can figure out something. Lola whispered, I hope so, Derek. The judge ruled to dissolve our union through an annulment. There was some question when Emily wanted to take her maiden name of Roberts back. This would leave the baby with the name Lawson. Emily said that before the baby was old enough to understand what a last name was, she intended to petition for a name change. could be Roger Jr. Roberts. She would be calling him RJ until that happened. I was in agreement and would not be against the change. I flew home a single man late Thursday night. The only responsibilities I had now were to myself and the diner. Yes, and to anyone in my future that I chose as a partner in life. I was sitting in the corner booth when Lola opened the diner in the morning. She didn't see me at first, as she was busy. When she did, I stood, and as she came toward me, I advanced into her arms. We kissed on the cheeks as we had done for more than a year. I'm glad to be home. I'm glad you're here too. We missed you. She studied me closely. How come you're so early? You must have been up most of the night. You should be in bed. I chuckled. I'm getting to that a little later. Could you bring me the first cup of coffee when it's ready? Sure. 10 minutes. You want a sweet roll? No, not yet. I'll ask when I want one. I sat back down and asked, is Hannah here yet? Lola smiled. Came in yesterday. She starts work with us next week. She is so sweet and loves her mother so much. The lady that brought her stayed over to meet you. Good. Lola brought my coffee, sweetened, no cream. As she turned to walk away, I said, you deserve a tip. Will this be sufficient? I held out an open ring box. Lola took it reverently between her hands, not looking at it because her eyes were glued to mine. Then, she whispered, I want to do this so much, but we can't. People here think we are brother and sister. What would they say? I haven't figured out how to explain it. I didn't hesitate. All you have to say right now is whether you want to become my wife or not. Will you accept my proposal of marriage? Lola trembled. Her eyes filled with tears. Then softly she whispered, yes, I will. I've waited so patiently for so long. I don't even care if people think we are brother and sister. No, I do care. I want a good, clean life ahead of us. I smiled. Lola, I said I would ask when I wanted a sweet roll. Would you be so sweet as to roll into my bed tonight? Her breath caught. Her hands shook. Then, she smiled through her tears. I'll be waiting there for you. Our words were almost incoherent as we clung and whispered love words to each other. Then, I finally said the words she had been waiting to hear. Lola, I love you. I wondered how I could have almost missed this chance for happiness. Could have been mine as far back as the time before I had met Emily. But I held her now, and I would never let her go. It was going to take some time for Agnes and Hannah to become used to each other again. But Lola and I were there to help make it happen. When Hannah saw how much her mother was loved, not only by Lola and me but by all of the patrons at Whitaker's, she came to see her mother through our eyes and not those of her twisted father. The Whitaker's diner is still in business. I posted a large sign just inside the door. Derek Lawson and Lola Monroe ran away from their past and found love. The marriage will take place on Labor Day. Free barbecue to our patrons. There was a copy of my birth certificate after my name, and a copy of Lola's after hers. No one yet had the gall to question our right to happiness. Emily and Aunt Margaret were invited to the wedding. Emily sent her regrets, just saying that she was vacationing in Vermont that week with a friend and wouldn't be able to attend. Aunt Margaret did attend and told me all about the new man in Emily's life. She declared she liked him almost as much as she liked me. Before the year was out, I was informed Junior was adopted. I no longer had a namesake. His name was now Graham Roberts. I accepted it without anger. Lola and I had taken to the road more than a year ago, not knowing where it would lead us. It led us to several places, Whitaker's Diner, for one, but mainly to each other, and ultimately to happiness.